Comrades, my name's John Dunn. I'm a former Derbyshire striking minor, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you about my arrest, my frame-up, my convictions as a result of being involved in that momentous strike. On April the 9th, 1984, I was part of a large picket at Cresswell Colliery, a Nottinghamshire NUM pit. It's actually in Derbyshire, but for historical reasons, it's part of the Nottinghamshire coalfield. Very peaceful picket, no untoward instances, and as the picket was breaking up and we were walking back to our transport, the police charged. I was just casually walking back and I suddenly felt my head explode. That's the only way I can describe it. The only feeling I can recall is thinking to myself that I mustn't fall down, because if I fell down and became unconscious, I might never get up and wake up again. I was dragged to a police wagon by two police officers, where I was left in the back of that wagon, bleeding profusely from the back of my head. When I alerted to the police sergeant in charge of the vehicle that I thought I was going to pass out, he told me I could fucking bleed to death. It was only the intervention of my late brother who forced them to take me to hospital. I was rushed by ambulance and I was accompanied by a police officer absolutely covered in blood. His face was absolutely drenched in blood. I now know that that was my blood, and he was the police officer who'd actually attacked the back of my head. I was never arrested as such. I was taken to the hospital, where, surrounded by policemen, the surgeon on duty was persuaded to sew my head up without using anaesthetic. I was in no frame of mind and drifting in and out of consciousness. I wasn't able to object to that. All I can say is that hurt as much as the blow itself did. I was then taken to Chesterfield Police Station and thrown into a cell. A friend who was a doctor, who was an active socialist and a supporter of the strike, was allowed to visit me and examine me. He informed the police that I had severe concussion and I must be immediately taken to hospital and placed under constant observation. The police's response was to call out their own police surgeon, who gave me 2 aspirins, and the constant observation took the form of a police officer banging or kicking my cell door every 20 minutes or half an hour and saying, "Are you fucking still alive in there?" The next morning I was taken to court, still covered in blood. By this time my family didn't know what had happened to me. They knew I'd been arrested, they knew I'd been injured, they didn't know the severity of it, they didn't know what was going to happen, they didn't know if I would be jailed or anything like that. I was taken, as I say, to court, where I found I'd been charged with threatening behaviour. That's the absurdity of it. Attacked on the back of my head, which means I threatened a policeman with the back of my head. I was placed on police bail, which prevented me from going anywhere near a colliery or any NCB premises at all. I remained on that police bail till I appeared in court later that year in September. Because my union was trying to expose the violence that had just started, this was way before, many weeks before the famous Battle of Orgreave, that's a well-documented police attack upon harmless pickets, but because the violence was just escalating against our fellow strikers, my union was keen to expose that. So in my name, they took out 3 private prosecutions against the Chief Constable of Derbyshire, which was the location where I was assaulted, the Chief Constable of Lancashire, because it was a Lancashire policeman that had assaulted me, and a private prosecution against the policeman himself. As I say, I was on bail until September. When I appeared in court in September, it wasn't in a traditional magistrates' court. The government, Margaret Thatcher in particular, had instructed the whole court process that they got to speed up the prosecution of minors. So many of us that day were tried. They opened up an old courthouse and used a retired judge that they called a stipendiary magistrate to facilitate this rapid processing of minors' arrests and convictions. On appearing in court, 2 minutes, just 2 minutes before I appeared before that judge, I was given a second prosecution. I had no time to discuss it with my solicitor, and it was a second charge of watching and besetting. That's a crime that dates back from the 1800s and actually predates trade union legislation. Watching and besetting actually means looking at. So in effect, I was being charged with looking at a police officer and with the back of my head and threatening that police officer with the back of my head. When I appeared in court, the police were so desperate to make sure that my private prosecutions were quashed that a whole stream of witnesses were brought in, none of whom I recognised as being involved in my arrest. The only one who gave evidence against me was the actual police officer who truncheoned me. All the police officers gave conflicting evidence. The first one said that they could easily recognise me because at that time I had long blonde hair. They could see my long blonde hair illuminated in the pit floodlights. When it was pointed out that the pit floodlights had been put out at least an hour before the time of my so-called arrest, the following policeman giving evidence never mentioned the floodlights, but one of them said I could recognise Mr. Dunn because of the camouflage jacket he was wearing and his long blonde hair. My defence solicitor then produced the jacket that I was actually wearing, still covered in my blood, and handed it to the prosecuting solicitor, who refused to handle it because it was covered in blood. It wasn't a camouflage jacket. It was a small black nylon jacket that bore no resemblance whatsoever to any camouflage jacket. So 2 conflicting pieces of evidence had been destroyed. Now, in any normal court of law, that would bring into question the whole of the evidence against me. But it went on, and a string of witnesses, 8 in total, all came and gave evidence against me. And finally, the police officer who'd assaulted me admitted to assaulting someone, to hitting someone with his truncheon, but said it definitely wasn't me. All my witnesses came forward and said that I'd been attacked from behind, that I'd not been involved in any trouble whatsoever, I'd not committed any violent act. But in summing up, the judge said that he believed everything that I'd said, but I must have got carried away, and he found me guilty of those 2 convictions. That meant that the private prosecutions were dead and buried and could not be used to actually prove what was happening in reality on the picket lines. I still carry those criminal records to this day. This year alone, I've been denied a visa to visit the United States. I suppose it's because those criminal convictions are still on my record. As part of the All Grief campaign, I submitted a Freedom of Information request to the Derbyshire Police for information regarding that arrest on April the 9th, 1984, and I got the response back that there was no record of it. No record at all of not only my arrest, but also these private prosecutions. I thought that strange, so I went to the National Police Records Office, who also had no record of that conviction. So I'm in the strange position of trying to clear my name of a conviction that I cannot find. It crops up on any records that have to be declared if I want to work with children or vulnerable adults or anything like that. It's there to be seen, but there is no actual evidence of that conviction. And I'm not the only one that's finding that out. 11,000 of us were arrested during that year of that strike. Many of them have asked for their criminal records to be released, their convictions, only to find that there's no record of theirs either. So here we have the situation where the most important dispute in the history of this country, where 11,000 people were arrested, and it's all vanished. There's no trace of it. Also, the government have hidden records away till the year 2066, when I'll be 114 if I live that long. That might be my only chance of finding out about what happened on that day in the strike. Now, isn't it funny that a government feels so insecure, is so afraid of the truth coming out, that one, it has to bury all evidence of arrests and convictions like mine, but also it has to lock away papers until 2066, when just about every participant in that strike will be dead and it will be consigned to history. What are they afraid of? And I would suggest that they are afraid of the truth about a massive government and state conspiracy to smash my union, the National Union of Mine Workers, to make sure that that strike was broken to such an extent that the Prime Minister of the day, Margaret Thatcher, micromanaged, as has been proven in the margins of the cabinet papers of that time. She micromanaged almost every day of that strike. And I think the government and the establishment, the powers that be, are afraid of it becoming known that a government conspired against ordinary, decent, hard-working people whose only crime was to want a job, was to want to keep their industry alive and to want to protect their community. That is the state of the society under which we live. Now, myself and my comrades in the All Grief Truth and Justice campaign are determined to make sure that the truth will come out. So once again, comrades, thank you for giving us this opportunity, and thank you for joining us in making sure that the world still remembers that historic dispute. And comrades, let's make sure that next time we fight, we win. Thank you very much.